Tonight, the northern leg of HS2 to Manchester is cancelled, causing chaos here in Manchester at the Conservative Party conference. While we understand the decision's been made, it's not yet clear when we'll be getting the announcements. Labour Mayor Andy Burnham is describing it as a shambles. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is having to put up with backseat drivers chipping in on how they do things differently, including one who was only at the wheel herself this time last year. And in the city of two footballing giants, I'll be joined live by the boss of the English Football League to tell me what he wants the government to do to protect clubs here in the north of England from going bust. All that and more with the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Alicia Kearns, and the former Downing Street Director of Communications, Guto, Harri, who are here to give their take for the next hour. It's Monday. I'm Sophy Ridge, live from the Conservative Party conference in Manchester, and this is the Politics Hub. Good evening from the Conservative Party conference in Manchester, where today was the day of the Chancellor's speech. Now, weeks of preparation, one of the highlights of the conference diary. And in the end, it wasn't the most significant political event of the day. It probably wasn't even the second most significant. And that's got to be a worry for a government struggling to maintain control of the narrative. Because 10 minutes before the speech, 10 minutes, I kid you not, we had the leaked story breaking here on Sky News earlier that Number 10 was going to scrap the second leg of HS2 between Birmingham and Manchester. Remember, we are in Manchester right now, in an old railway hall. I mean, you couldn't make it up. Number 10 say that no final decisions have been made, but there is a big swinging door and an empty stable. And if people here aren't talking about the future of high-speed rail, well, they're talking about Liz Truss, who gave her alternative PM pitch to a packed-out room earlier today. The one thing they're not talking about, the Chancellor's speech. We'll be discussing that throughout the show, but first, here's our political editor, Beth Rigby, on the day the Chancellor's big speech was dramatically derailed.
Smiles and applause for the conference cameras. This Jeremy Hunt's script.
Right now, we're focused on bringing down inflation. Conference, when we halve inflation, that's not a 1% income tax cut. It's a 5% boost to incomes compared to if it stayed the same.
But outside the room, the reset narrative being ripped up. Minutes before, news leaking that the PM had decided to scrap the northern leg of HS2. Number 10 insisting no final decision yet, but the damage done and the day derailed. The HS2 rail link to Manchester was the embodiment of the Levelling Up project, hailed as transformative for the north of England, now looking set to hit the buffers.
For weeks, the pitch has been rolled. Whispers to me that the costs of HS2 are out of control and that the Prime Minister is a man who doesn't want to throw good money after bad, as one person put it to me. So scrapping the northern leg of HS2 was always on the cards. But the problem for the Prime Minister here at his party conference in Manchester is that he has lost control of the narrative, with a huge announcement being leaked and not on his terms.
OK, good evening, everybody.
With conference thrown into chaos, the West Midlands Mayor holding an impromptu stump speech, begging the Prime Minister to change his mind.
The choice, very stark. Either, as the rumours say, go on, cancel Euston, cancel to Manchester. But you will be turning your back on an opportunity to level up, a once-in-a-generation opportunity.
You see it as a great betrayal of the British people, of the Levelling Up agenda, and you also worry that it might cost the Conservatives a general election.
You're putting words into my mind there. I did not get anywhere to that. I said to you that we will not be fulfilling our objective to level up.
Are you just here to cause trouble?
And if that wasn't bad enough, earlier in the day, the Prime Minister's old adversary was back, bold and bullish.
Let's be prepared to make Conservative arguments again, even if it's unpopular, even if it's difficult. I want everybody in this room to unleash their inner Conservative. And finally, my friends, let's make Britain grow again.
and a competing Tory vision that the grassroots rather like. This growth coalition of Tories getting bigger too, numbering 60 MPs, more than enough to sink anything that isn't a true blue budget later this year. 60 MPs in this group, this growth group in Parliament.
Yes.
Budget coming up, is it an open threat?
No, we're not the mafia. We're Conservative MPs. We support the government. We don't go around threatening people. No horses' heads are going to mysteriously appear in people's beds.
This a crucial conference. 2 days down, 2 to go. Can the Prime Minister get this back on track? Beth Rigby, Sky News, Manchester.
Well, Beth is here with us now. Beth, it feels like we should talk about the policy, because this is quite significant, even if it's not the policy they wanted to be talking about today. HS2, how's it going down amongst MPs?
Well, it's interesting, Sophie, because although we saw quite angry voices in that piece with both those mayors in those cities being very agitated about the prospect of this being cut, if you talk to people around here and some senior ministers, you get a different view. One person saying to me, this is £100 billion. It might matter to people in Birmingham and Manchester, but actually people around the country might want that money spent elsewhere. And it goes back to what Rishi Sunak is doing here, saying, I'm taking choices. Some people might not like them, but enough people will to perhaps vote for me in the next general election. One cabinet minister saying to me the other day about the whole of this, he's trying to put clear blue water now between Labour and the Conservatives, show what he believes in the hope that it will garner votes for him. But of course, this is extremely controversial. It has been championed by successive Conservative Prime Ministers. It's been the crown, the jewel in the crown, if you like, for levelling up and that agenda. And so it's difficult for a Prime Minister, if he wants to do this and he wants to frame the argument as to why, when he loses control of the narrative, he's getting Andy Street complaining about it before he can make the argument about costs and choice. And that is the problem for the PM. And if you talk to insiders in Number 10, they are still saying tonight it hasn't been signed off. The Secretary of State hasn't signed this off yet. And then you look at the headlines in the papers and everyone's running with the story. So they've completely lost control. And this is the Prime Minister that's having a Rishi Sunak reset. This conference, it's day 2, and he's lost the narrative on taxes. Yesterday on Sky News with Michael Gove saying something to our colleague Trevor, while the Prime Minister's saying something else on the BBC, and then this today.
And quickly, on the losing control of the narrative, we saw you there, Beth, like out and about, different MPs, lots of fringes.
It's been a hectic day.
It's felt quite hectic, hasn't it?
It has felt quite... So, in my job, you know when the narrative is being lost, when you're suddenly finding yourself running around to events that you weren't expecting to happen. So, for example, Andy Street impromptu press conference, suddenly 10 minutes before you get told that's happening. When that begins to happen at a party conference and you're running around chasing people, you realise that things are not going according to plan. I should have been in the hall listening to Jeremy Hunt, doing a piece to camera there, talking about the government's approach to economy and tax, and all of those speeches have just slid off the desk as we have to try and grapple with a breaking story and then all of the repercussions. And it does smack a bit of conferences past where a Prime Minister's trying to be on track and they're getting very destabilised.
Thanks, Beth. Really interesting to hear your insight.
Yes,
good to have you here. And as Beth was saying, it does feel like people not talking about the Chancellor's speech in the way perhaps they expected. One of those people, the Energy Secretary Claire Coutinho. Now, she's been touted as a potential future leader after getting promoted by Rishi Sunak over the summer. It was her first big TV interview today. Before we listen to her, I just want to play you this bit from her speech this morning about what she claimed were Labour's green policies. And this is just so you know what on earth I'm asking about a bit later.
It's no wonder that Labour seems so relaxed about taxing meat. Keir Starmer doesn't eat it. And Ed Miliband is clearly scarred by his skirmish with a bacon sandwich.
Are you scrapping the second leg of HS2 from Birmingham to Manchester?
So no final decision has been made. I know this is something that you guys have been talking about a lot, but there's no decision that's been made. I know the Chancellor said this morning that all economic infrastructure is kept under review, and we need to make sure that we're always looking at taxpayer value for money, and that is the position.
I know that's the line, no final decision's been made, but it's not just us talking about it. We're talking about it because people in your government are telling us that you're going to scrap it. I mean, the line's broken. It's not holding, is it?
Well, look, all I can tell you is that there's no decision that has been made. It is under review, and all of these things are under review all the time. But it's really important that we look at the overall picture, which is that since 2010, we spent £33 billion on infrastructure in the north. When I was in the Treasury, we were working on these programmes which were making sure that you had better transport infrastructure within cities, which is also really important. So that's all been part of our programme of growth over the last 13 years. And I think that's also really important.
I mean, reading between the lines, it doesn't sound like you're preparing the ground for it to be kept. It sounds like you're rolling the pitch for it to be scrapped.
Well, look, that's not a decision for me. That's a decision for other people. But what I can tell you is that no final decision has been made.
OK. Now, we're in Manchester. We're literally in an old railway hall, and the news is coming out that you are not going to be extending this rail line to Manchester. I mean, it's a bit embarrassing, isn't it?
Well, look, I appreciate that you want to give me questions that I can't answer, but the truth is it's not a decision for me, and all I can tell you right now is no decision has been made. But of course, we've been investing in infrastructure across the country, and particularly in the north, for the last 10 years.
OK, I've got the line. I understand. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, gave a speech today where it felt to me like he was almost signalling the return back to austerity in some ways, hiring freeze in the civil service, squeeze on benefits. At the very same time, Liz Truss is pitching a totally different economic vision, one of growth, one of tax cuts. Who's right?
So I wouldn't say that at all. I reject that there was a return to austerity. What he actually talked about was raising the national living wage. It's going to be now, I think, if not the highest, one of the highest national living wages anywhere in Europe. And actually, if you look at something like benefits, we raised them in line with inflation about 10% this year. And throughout the course of the last few years, when people have struggled, whether it's with furlough or helping them through the energy crisis with £40 billion of support, we have supported vulnerable people at a high cost to the rest of the taxpayers to make sure that we can really support vulnerable people through these difficult times.
I want to ask you about Liz Truss as well. Is she being helpful?
Well, look, I think Conservative Party, one of the things I love about it is that it is always a broad church, and we feel very comfortable in having debates about things. So I haven't followed all of her comments, but I do think it's good that she stands up and talks about her views. I think it's good that everyone in the party feels that they can do that.
I mean, the place was rammed. There was queues snaking around the corridor. There was over 200 people in the room, it felt like. Is the Conservative Party preparing to go back to the future with Liz Truss?
I'm very happy with the current Prime Minister. I think everyone is as well. But look, I think the really important thing is that we have our debates here. We talk about different ideas. And what you're going to see from the Prime Minister is his long-term vision to make sure that we've got plans in the longer term for the future. And I think that's what you'll be seeing from us.
I mean, there's a serious point here, though, because it feels like you're losing control of the narrative a bit. You've got Liz Truss pitching an alternative economic vision. You've got the HS2 announcement effectively leaking out. I mean, what's going on?
Well, look, I think party conferences, as you'll know, because you'll have been to a ton, I've been to a ton, always have...
last year.
They always have moments like this. We're here to have a debate. We're here to talk about fresh ideas. And I think the really important thing is that you'll see from the government, from the Prime Minister, ideas which will be talking about the longer-term security of the country. That's what you saw from me today in terms of the energy sector. I was talking about things like nuclear, pushing forward on things like small modular reactors, which are all the things which are in the best interest for the long term in the country.
Yeah, you've suddenly, with your brief, it feels, being propelled right to the front of the Conservatives' election pitch. A lot of it is about being on the side of drivers. I mean, are you a motorist yourself? What car do you drive?
I am. I have a second-hand Ford Fiesta. I wouldn't say I'm the world's best driver. I'm quite a cautious driver, but I do have a car that I do drive.
And you think that the embracement, I guess, of the kind of driving agenda is not at odds with net zero?
No, not at all. Not at all. This is the thing. I think, lots of people need their cars to get around. Like, I have a semi-rural constituency, and for lots of people, there's no other way to get around. I think it's really important that we support drivers. But if you look at what's happening with net zero, we have some of the most ambitious targets in the world. We've decarbonised faster than any other major economy, and we're not moving away. We're not moving away from those targets. We're just trying to make sure that the burden doesn't fall on struggling households.
It sounds a bit have cake, eat cake. You're saying, yeah, it's fine, we're going to get to net zero, but guess what? You don't have to make any sacrifices. It's just going to happen magically.
That's absolutely not the case. I mean, it hasn't been happening magically. We have been working really hard for the last 13 years, for example, to clean up our power system. So when we came into power, 7% of our power came from renewables, and it's now well over 40%. I think in Q1 this year it was 48%. That takes hard work. We've got the first, second, third, fourth largest offshore wind farms anywhere in the world in this country, all built under our relatively conservative government, and we're going to have the fifth one too soon. So all of this stuff does take hard work, but I think you can do this in a sensible way. We can meet those targets, but also protect families.
I just want to read a bit of your speech to you, because there was one section of it that really struck me. You said, it's no wonder Labour seems so relaxed about taxing meat, so Keir Starmer doesn't eat it, and Ed Miliband is clearly scarred by his encounter with a bacon sandwich. You didn't write that, did you?
I did actually write that. I think, it's good to have a light moment in your speech as well. But the point is actually...
They're not proposing a meat tax.
The point is actually very serious. So some of the things that Labour are proposing are incredibly hard for working families. So whether you have things like...
meat tax? That's what you're saying here.
Well, so the point is, they are proposing things which are pushing families too hard. So you've got things like the ULEZ tax expansion, which does cost families £12.50 a day.
It's not meat tax, though, is it?
But that is very difficult. And they've got things like proposing that you would decarbonise the electricity grid by 2030 again, which would result in very difficult choices for families.
Meat tax.
And their plans to push up inflation by borrowing £28 billion. So the point that I was making is quite serious. Yes, that was a light-hearted moment in the speech, but the point is actually deadly serious, that if you push people too far in this country, you will lose the cause of climate change, something that I'm passionate about, because I think it's really important that we get there.
But genuinely, there isn't a meat tax.
Well, actually, if you try and push too hard, what you do end up with is people, and by the way, this has been part of the debate, talking about discouraging people from eating meat. Now, as someone who's worked in government for some time, I can tell you when people tell you that they want to discourage people from eating meat, what they mean
Where did Keir Starmer say that?
So when they talk about moving at the pace that they're moving, what they're implying is that difficult choices will have to be made. And we know from having carefully safeguarded this debate that when people talk about trying to do things faster and quicker, they do talk about things like discouraging people from eating meat and changing their dietary requirements.
Keir Starmer's talked about people eating less meat, has he?
Well, I mean, Keir Starmer doesn't ever tell people exactly what he thinks, which is part of the problem. And what we have tried to do is set out a really clear agenda on net zero, so people know where we stand, which is making sure that we can get to these ambitious targets, but also protecting families.
Now, your face was in a Sunday Times article, headlined, "The Tory Women Who Want to Be Leader." Claire Coutinho, recently elevated to the cabinet as Energy Secretary, has barely any cabinet experience, but she's formidably intelligent and allies speak highly of her political nous. She's likely to emerge as the face of the continuity Sunak calls, likely to emerge as a leadership candidate. That's a meteoric rise.
No, I don't think so. Look, I've only been in my job 6 weeks. I am very busy as it is. I've got I think, some of the most important briefs that we've got in the country, energy security and net zero, and I'm very passionate about delivering both.
At the same time, though, you can see it going on around us, the jostling for position, the different speeches by different wings of the party. Would you be a bit tempted at a tilt yourself at some point?
No, look, like I said, I'm very busy with the current position.
OK. It feels a little bit like you're kind of taking that time-honoured role as the leadership candidate that the papers talk about, who seems to have sort of come from nowhere, if you like. So can you just give us a bit of a sense? I feel this is your first kind of big interview since getting the big elevation. So give us a sense of yourself. Well, something people might not know about you.
I would say the reason that I am so honoured and privileged to do this role is it actually covers a lot of the things that I've been interested in my whole career. So one is investment and economy. The second is struggling households, something that I've done work with since I was about 16, and the third is the environment. And I think actually this brief brings all of those three things together, and that's exactly what I'm going to be focused on delivering for the country.
What's your position when it comes to taxes? Michael Gove told my colleague Trevor Phillips yesterday that he wants to see tax cuts before the election. Do you?
Well, look, we all want to see tax cuts. We're Conservatives. That is part of our philosophy. I think the really important thing at the moment is inflation. So if you look at what the Conservatives have done over our last period, is we've taken quite a lot of people, particularly at the bottom of society, out of tax. But something which affects everybody, particularly those people who are in those kind of lowest deciles, is inflation.
So it doesn't sound to me like tax cuts before the election is where you're at.
I would say I think the priority has to be tackling inflation, because not only does it make the poorest in society poorer, it also affects public services, it also affects businesses.
Do you think that are tax cuts inflationary?
I would love to see tax cuts, but I think the priority economically has to be to tackle inflation. And actually, we've seen it move a long way. So if you think about the beginning of the year, it was 11%. It's now coming down. It's forecast to fall further next year. But that, to me, has to be the priority.
Claire Coutinho speaking to me a little bit earlier. Now, coming up on the Politics Hub, we'll get reaction from that interview, I should say, from tonight's panel. That is Alicia Kearns and Guto. Harri will also be asking whether the Prime Minister has lost control of the agenda here at conference. Stay with us.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. We are live for the Conservative Party conference here in Manchester. We can get some reaction now to what's been going on here from our panel. We're joined by Alicia Kearns, who's the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, and Guto Harri, who served as Downing Street Director of Communications for Boris Johnson, also commentator as well. HS2. It's not what we expected to be talking about today, but it feels like 10 minutes before the Chancellor's speech, the narrative got away from them, and suddenly everyone's talking about this. And we're in Manchester. I mean, it's a bit embarrassing from a communications perspective.
Yeah, if you are going to announce bad news for Manchester, well, do it in Manchester if you're into sort of self-flagellation and, you know, self-inflicted wounds. I think it's a problem because I know there are arguments for cancelling these big projects. Of course there are, always. But A, it's a symbolic thing. It's right at the heart of the idea that the Conservative Party is no longer the preserve of rich white people in the southeast of England. It cares about the north of England. And so whether it adds up or not, it is a great big symbolic thing. B, it's something where a load of money has been spent already, so it's bad to pull it. C, what signal does it give to the world that we can't build a railway? It's like we've given up. And so it is indicative. And you have now strong voices, like the fantastic Mayor of the West Midlands, who is furious about this, understandably, and reflects the view of his people. So it's one of those that has to be handled, frankly, better than it has been.
I mean, Norman Tennant's still saying that they haven't taken a final decision. But let's be honest, we know the way the wind's blowing. We heard it there from Claire Coutinho.
It is difficult because from everything you see, I haven't been told anything as a Conservative MP, but it does feel like the writing was on the wall. And I see it from both sides. So look, from my perspective, they started building at the wrong end of the country. The fact that costs just keep getting out of control, which I think there's a lot of questions to the management company there, all the way through to just some of the ways that it's been handled. But at the same time, the message it sends to international investors that once we commit to something, we can't be relied on to see that commitment through. I think there's a real issue there. I agree entirely. So I see it from both sides. It doesn't affect my constituency, but there are, real concerns.
I've got to ask you about Liz Truss, because it felt to me like, it just felt completely extraordinary, if I'm being completely honest with you. It was packed, the hall. A year ago, she was giving a speech here as Prime Minister, and it felt like she was trying to do the same thing this time.
I think it's showbiz, isn't it? It's there was a novelty value. People knew there was going to be a frisson. This was going to be about as exciting as it was going to be, which is, I can say this, very poor man's Boris.
What, Liz Truss,
somebody who's going to turn up and disrupt conflict.
I mean, I remember those Boris Johnson.
Yeah, and he did it for years. I was hounded out of this town one time when I came here with him. Literally, there were people walking down the platform waving us off as we left, saying, "Don't come back." But Boris became Prime Minister. Boris was offering a genuine alternative to what the mainstream party wanted at the time. Liz Truss has been there, done that. We know how it ended. It didn't end well. And so most people, I think, expect some humility. So I think rather than a sign of this huge, enormous Liz Truss fan club, there's this instinctive human curiosity. What's it like to be a Prime Minister who tried something with noble motivation, but it went catastrophically wrong? And then she's got the cojones, I think we can say on Sky, to sort of stand up at conference and think she can contribute to the debate. People want to know what that looks like. And I think that's what it was, rather than a sign of massive dissent.
Absolutely. This is not the fan club of Liz Truss. Look, I think the point about humility is absolutely right. And also, I think there's a respect level there that's not being upheld. So look, when Rishi Sunak didn't win the leadership contest, he didn't make a big scene at Liz's conference. He gave her the space, the courtesy for her to set out her agenda. And I think it's really important. Look at how Theresa May has performed as a previous Prime Minister. She recognises the importance of that role, the weight that comes when she uses her voice. But I think people are going for the theatre. But at the same time, am I pleased that at party conference we're really hashing out and debating issues? This is a manifesto year. We are coming up with a manifesto for the next election. Let's have that debate and let's have it properly, but let's not suggest that this is anything more than theatre.
It's kind of crazy when you think that she's here, setting out a different economic pitch on the same day as the Chancellor. But she also appointed this guy as the Chancellor, right? Jeremy Hunt, after the mini-budget. I just can't get my head around what's happened over the last year, to be honest.
Well, that was like hostage video. She had a gun to her head. She appointed him under significant duress. And it's credit to him that his arrival on the scene calmed everything down. And he's ended up virtually bomb-proof. I was one of a few people in Downing Street 18 months ago thought if we brought him into the fold, it could have been a positive thing. So credit to him. He has steadied the market. He's left the party today with a tantalising prospect that there may be space for tax cuts next year.
Would you support that, tax cuts next year?
But
absolutely,
not now. Yeah.
But only when he has the financial headroom to do things. And look, people have said we want to see the grown-ups at the table. We want to see someone who is an exceptional politician. That is Jeremy Hunt. He's decent, he's respected, the markets respect him. But we can't be calling for tax cuts now if it's going to shock the economy.
We'll have more on tax cuts a bit later in the programme. Thank you both very much for some lively analysis there. Coming up on the Politics Hub. Well, after Liz Truss received a rapturous reception here for her pro-growth message, I'll be looking at what the different Tory tribes at conference really want. And I'll speak to a member of the new generation of Conservatives pushing, as we were just discussing, that low tax, low immigration agenda. You're watching the Politics Hub live from Conservative Party conference in Manchester. Now, you can learn an awful lot about the state of a party by that conference, and I know what you're expecting me to say. After 13 years of power, this is a party that's tired, with half the MPs not showing up. But that's not actually true. It's actually fizzing with ideas. Some events are packed out with standing room only. There's just one problem. It's all happening in the fringes, because today is the day of the backseat drivers. You know what's really struck me about this conference is that the main action isn't here on the main stage, it's all going on in the fringes. And there are three tribes with three key issues who are battling for control of the Conservative Party. This is a kind of fringe event that is packed today, and you can see who's speaking there. Priti Patel, former Home Secretary, ally of Boris Johnson, someone very involved in the battle for the future of the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
Perhaps the most pressing issue with the largest tribe here at Conservative Conference is taxes. And the debate is really about not whether or not they should be cut, but when. Before the election or after the election. It's a really live debate here. Look how busy it is in here. I can hardly get in the room. This is a fringe on immigration. It's got speakers like the MP Jacob Rees-Mogg, a key issue for many people who are looking to the future of what the Conservative Party should be about. Three tribes, three issues, one big problem for the Prime Minister. because it strikes me that the debate here at Conservative Party conference isn't even about what happens at this general election, it's what happens after it. Well, earlier I spoke to Miriam Cates, the Conservative MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge in South Yorkshire. She's the leading member of the New Conservative group, which is calling for tax cuts and lower immigration.
So we represent what we call the new conservatism, so this coalition of voters from our traditional shires, if you like, the home counties, and our new voters from the industrial red wall, the post-industrial heartlands, like where I represent in North Sheffield and Barnsley. And our premise is that we had a magic formula in 2019. We united those small C Conservatives across the country from those very different backgrounds, and that's what brought us to power, that's what gave us that 80-seat majority. And we believe the demand for that kind of politics is still there, and we think we can see that in the polls when we start to talk more common sense about net zero and things like that.
You say the demand's still there. It sounds a little bit like you're saying that's not the direction you're going in.
Well, what I'm saying is, although the promise was there in 2019 to move to this new kind of politics, much more in line with the interests of ordinary people, we've only partially fulfilled that. So yes, we delivered Brexit, we've done some other good things, but essentially we haven't fully freed ourselves from the shackles of European law, we haven't fully reformed taxation, we certainly haven't fulfilled our promises on immigration levels, for example. But what we're saying is it's not too late. We can have a manifesto that absolutely leans back into the interests of those voters. And as we've seen from a modest but definitely a poll bounce since Rishi Sunak spoke so convincingly on the pragmatic approach to net zero last week, common sense cuts through. And so in this rally that we just had now, which wasn't just our New Conservatives group, we also had the support of senior, very well-known colleagues like Bill Cash and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Priti Patel all spoke, and Ian Duncan-Smith.
So let's take some of these things, shall we? Taxes. What specific taxes do you want to see come down?
So often when we talk about tax cuts, we're talking about big headline rates and how much the wealthiest pay. But what we're saying is that there are certain pinch points of our economy, certain income levels for families and small businesses that are a real burden on productivity. So an example that we gave today is VAT. The VAT registration threshold has been £80,000 for a long time. Now, if you're a plumber and your turnover is £80,000, that doesn't make you rich, because probably half of that or more is spent buying pipes and boilers and things like that. If we increase that threshold to £250,000, instead of deliberately squashing their businesses to not have to register for that,
that's a massive tax cut for people earning a lot of money.
But it's also anti-inflationary, and it boosts productivity, because if you're that plumber who's approaching the threshold, do you register for VAT, have to charge your customers 20% more and deal with HMRC, or do you take 2 months off to make sure you don't go through the threshold? It's such a drain on productivity. So those are the kind of tax tweaks that we could make that would increase productivity, but are not about slashing headline rates just for the newspapers.
And how about immigration? What kind of levels do you want to see it come down to?
Well, in 2019, we promised to reduce net migration. And in 2019, net migration was 200,000. And I think
you want it to go down to less than 200,000?
Well, we should at least go back to the 200,000. And we saw last year the net was 600,000. And what's gone wrong?
You want to reduce it to a third of what it is currently?
Potentially. And obviously, we can't do that.
Big. Yeah.
It is big. But our first policy paper, our first New Conservatives policy paper, back in July, I think, set out exactly how we would do that. I think it was 8 or 10 measures, tweaking student visas, tweaking dependent visas, those kind of things that would bring us back down to that mark. And that, that's a basic fulfilment of a promise to the British people. So it's those kind of things where, we've said the right things, and we have control over European migration now, but we've set our points-based system far too flexibly, far too low a bar in terms of salary and skill level to come in, and we've got to fix that for the next election.
So let's ask you about High Speed 2, because look, we pretty much know what's going to happen, even if Number 10 aren't admitting it. The second leg connecting Birmingham to Manchester, but also crucially to all those other northern towns and cities as well, it's not going ahead.
Yes.
Is that okay with you?
I think it's been a terrible, scandalous waste of money so far, and I think the promise was good originally. But let's be honest, getting to London faster and more often is not levelling up the north. That's not what's going to boost productivity in places like mine. What's going to boost productivity in places like mine is those local connections. So when I go and knock on doors in my constituency, what people say to me is, my young adult child can't get to training. They can't get to work because there are no buses anymore, or there are no local trains. And I think it's absolutely right to take that money that was going to be spent on this project that wouldn't have actually helped any of my constituents, actually, because we don't live close enough to the planned route, but to repurpose that into the kind of local transport that absolutely will level up, if you like. So, you know, yes, of course, it's a scandal and an embarrassment in many ways how long it's taken, but I do think this is the right decision.
Miriam Cates talking there. Well, the West Midlands Mayor, Andy Street, joins us tonight. Talking about the news about HS2, I guess you didn't expect to be here on the Monday Conservative conference getting absolutely mobbed by journalists, but here we are.
No, it was a new experience for me. You're right, Sophie, about our huddle. But you know, the point is very simple here. This is a project that I think is of national significance for generations. We've argued for it for years, and indeed successive governments have supported it. And now the Prime Minister could be on the edge of scrapping it. I get he's got a really, really big problem. The costs are significantly above budget, you might even say out of control, but that does not need to lead to scrapping. And that's why this new offer from the private sector, I thought, needed to be put on the table.
Right, what is this new offer then?
Yeah. So the simple way of thinking about this is at the moment this has been done very much as a statist project. All the costs are taken by the public exchequer. It's all on the balance sheet. That's not necessarily how it has to be. We've not brought in the expertise from the private sector to say we can reduce this cost, we can actually get it paid for in other ways potentially. That's how it's done in other countries. So these are companies that have worldwide expertise in engineering, in design, in financing, critically saying we will come together to work with the Prime Minister and his team to find a different way of getting this done on the Birmingham to Manchester leg.
It's over, isn't it?
It's never over, as they say, until the fat lady sings.
I mean, you listen to, you know, we had an interview with Claire Coutinho earlier. It seems pretty clear to me that all the groundwork is being laid, that talk about costs, that talk about difficult decisions, to scrap it.
No one is denying the costs are difficult. But my argument is the brave thing to do in the spirit of the conference is to say we keep the principle. The idea of a spine of connectivity from London to Manchester has to be right. The brave decision is to say we stick the course and we find a way that we're going to do this. As a G7 country, you're telling me we can't build a railway from London to Manchester? It's laughable, frankly.
Laughable, you think? Yeah.
I do, and I honestly think that if we end up with a line that just goes from Old Oak Common to Birmingham, it's there almost as evidence that we cannot do really complex, except it's complex, big infrastructure projects. And you know, as a message to international investors, that is not good. And that's why, however near we are to the decision point, I was determined to make this offer with private sector businesses today.
I've got a really clear question for you. If it is axed, will you quit?
I haven't even given a moment's thought to that. The issue today, and we've had to work very hard to pull this together at very short notice, wasn't what I was expecting when I arrived in Manchester. That has been the sole focus, to say there is something really, Prime Minister, that could show brilliant leadership and actually could enable him still to deliver the vision of this.
What do you think about it now, then? What do you think?
I'm still working very hard on that. We've been talking to CEOs of global companies today. That is the right thing for me to do, not to think about my political future.
Talking about levelling up,
yeah.
If it doesn't go ahead, would you see this as a betrayal of levelling up?
So we have to be really honest about this. There are lots of other things to do with levelling up that are actually going really well. There's been big investments in regional transport pieces, there's been a big investment in skills across the regions, definitely. There are many, many other things that drive levelling up. But we have said many, many times that actually that connectivity, the investment that's come on the back of the promise of it, that's a critical part of levelling up.
Just one quick question for you. You were the former head of John Lewis,
oh, yeah.
And today the John Lewis boss, Dame Sharon White, is to step down after 5 years. How difficult an environment is it for companies like John Lewis?
It's very hard. And of course, John Lewis, I always said it was an asset that we were employee-owned, but it's a challenging point in that you can't go and raise cash in the same sort of way. So, of course, that's been a challenge during Dame Sharon's time. But looking to the future, it is still a brilliant retailer, both John Lewis and Waitrose, and under the right leadership, really focusing on those retail excellence points, as some of our competitors do. I still said hour there, that gives it away. Still said hour. There is a really, really positive future for John Lewis and Waitrose.
I know it's been a busy day for you. Thank you for coming on The Politics.
My pleasure.
Andy Street there. Coming up next on the programme, well, we are in a city that's home to two of the richest football clubs in the world. But I'm going to be speaking to the chair of the English Football League, Rick Parry, about the financial crisis facing clubs further down the football pyramid.
Look, it is the story of Australian nurses and British women, Dutch nuns, throw in the odd Kiwi, and other nationalities, and credible American woman, who were kept prisoner by the Japanese in the jungles of Sumatra for 3 years and 7 months. Yeah, look, I had to write it as fiction because when I write stories, I like to write them using dialogue and being able to imagine the settings that you can't get described. But can I tell you, though, every single storyline, every vignette in this book happened. It may not, and this is the thing that I'm a bit sad about, it may not have happened to the person I've given it to, because there were 500 women there. I couldn't write about all 500. But fiction, yes, those storylines you'll read about, they happened, every single one of them. The fact that they were in the jungle, that nobody knew they existed for all that time. There were Japanese prisoner of war camps in Singapore. Changi's the most famous one known. And so the people in Australia and in Britain knew that there were men and women being held in prisoner of war camps. They did not know about this one. Look, her name is Nora Chambers, and oh my gosh, everybody here in the UK needs to know this woman's name and who she was. She had trained at the Royal Academy of Music here in London, so a very, very gifted, talented musician. After a while, the women started performing plays and having concerts, and so singing was part of the camp life anyway. Just on those Saturday night concerts, they put on to entertain themselves. But Nora took it one step further. She said, we need the classics. Well, how can you represent Schubert, Mozart, Tchaikovsky, Ravel when you don't have any instruments? So she trained a group of some 40 to 50 women for their voices to represent the instruments. Incredible, incredible talent and performance that these women gave. Not only did the women in the camp become overwhelmed by it, so did their Japanese guards. And there are many reports I found and testimonies of how the guards were reduced to tears, hearing the beautiful sound.
Incredibly moving.
Yes, and those documents, those music that she hand wrote, it's survived until today, and I've held some 60 or 70 pages written in the jungle 80 years ago.
Welcome back. You're watching the Politics Hub live from Conservative Party conference in Manchester. Now, this is quite exciting because after the Politics Hub this evening, there is the very first episode of a new show, The UK Tonight, which we're all very excited about on Sky News. Our lead UK presenter, Sarah J. Mee, is at the helm.
Hi, Sophie. You'll know only too well how it feels right now, the butterflies of excitement before the launch of a new show. The UK Tonight coming your way, the first episode at 8 o'clock tonight. You deal with politicians. We're very much dealing with people. We're putting people at the heart of the stories we cover from the length and breadth of the UK. It's going to be a showcase as well for our original and investigative journalism. In fact, tonight we've got a special report from our home editor, Jason Farrell. He asks, who runs the prisons? According to prison officers, it's the prisoners. It's a shocking report. We have reaction as well from the Prison Officers Association to what he has uncovered. Mobile phones in schools, good thing, bad thing? Can they be banned? That's what the government wants, but is that actually workable? And also, if you were following the Ryder Cup over the weekend, you will be aware of a rather unlikely Ryder Cup hero, a Scottish golf fan who became an internet sensation after his celebrations when Team Europe won. All that and much, much more coming up at 8 o'clock. I'll see you then.
Definitely looking forward to checking that out after the Politics Hub. Now, here in Manchester, football's a bit like politics, with the blue side and the red side locked in a bitter rivalry, one in which, for the moment, the Blue Party are in the ascendancy. But elsewhere in English football, things are in a desperate state, with a number of clubs facing the prospect of financial oblivion. And joining us now is the chair of the EFL, the English Football League, that's Rick Parry. Just how concerned are you about finances in football?
We're very concerned. We need a major reset. This isn't about tinkering. We've got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get this right. We've failed to do it over the last 30 years. We are supporters of the regulator. We're all about making clubs sustainable. Totally in favour of better regulation.
So what does the government need to do then?
Oh, just get on with the bill. Just do it. Just do it.
And the bill, for viewers who might not be across it, what are the key sort of measures that you need?
Well, the key measures are improving regulation, financial regulation, which is controversial. There are people who don't want it. So better regulation holds no fears for us. We're about making clubs sustainable, and to do that, you need a financial reset to make them solvent, and then better regulation to keep them sustainable, to make sure that extra money coming in isn't wasted. So the two things go absolutely hand in hand, and football could have done it. Of course, football could have done it, but it hasn't. And so we are supportive of the government's measures and just hoping it happens quickly.
I want to ask you a bit about the management of football clubs. I'm not talking about the Premier League, I'm talking about other clubs. I'll put my cards on the table. I'm a Sheffield Wednesday fan. Our owner recently said he's not going to put any additional money into the football club. He's unhappy with insults and his treatment, he says, by fans. Scunthorpe United also seen fans being banned from football matches for criticising the management. Is there a problem with the way football clubs are being managed?
With some.
Yeah.
By no means all. We have some fabulous owners, and they far outweigh the problem ones. But, I mean, our definition of sustainability is making sure that clubs are not dependent on owner funding. And if you look at the clubs where we've had problems, Derby, Wigan 3 times, Bolton, Reading at the moment, Scunthorpe, Southend, it always follows from the owner funding drying up. So owner funding is fantastic until it isn't.
Yeah.
And the owners either can't fund, won't fund, and suddenly the clubs fall off a cliff. So there has to be a better system that reduces that sustainability, makes clubs sustainable, makes sure that we have proper fan engagement across every club. And again, most of our clubs are doing the right things, consulting with fans, but then every so often you see a Scunthorpe United or a Sheffield Wednesday. And I mean, it was interesting last week, Prime Minister did a radio interview about a small business in Reading. Reading Football Club. He wouldn't have done it for any other small business in Reading. Clubs matter so much to their communities. And interesting, the government's publicity over the weekend about the importance of towns. I mean, we have 20 EFL clubs in northern towns.
Yeah, the Red Wall, right?
The Red Wall, the heartbeat of their local communities.
Should they be treated differently to other businesses because of how much they matter to the community?
They should. I mean, they are businesses. They've got to thrive. But, for example, stadiums are major community assets, and how clubs deal with their stadiums, whether they use them for collateral, whether they sell them off, that's an area where government, local authorities can perhaps step in. Cultural heritage of clubs, really important. Supporter engagement, important. But they are businesses. They have to, they are spending a lot of money. They're generating quite a lot of money. So, of course, they're businesses. But they're also great social enterprises.
One last thought from you. After what happened in the Tottenham-Liverpool game, are you quite happy that the EFL doesn't have VAR?
Yeah, absolutely. We've never been massive fans of VAR, so... but actually, all you need to do is to use it properly.
Yeah, which is not what we saw. Understood. Thank you very much for coming on the programme and giving your thoughts about the importance of football clubs in local communities, particularly, of course, here in Manchester, but replicated across so many towns and cities across the UK as well. Thank you. Well, it's a far cry from the Etihad or the Old Trafford, but this conference has already seen a little bit of football action. Yesterday saw the traditional eve of conference lobby versus MPs football match. It's a real staple in the calendar, and despite the temptation from the politicians to take revenge for any less than flattering coverage over the last year, it was, by all reports, an entertaining match, won in the end by the Hacks, 4-2. Now, the Prime Minister perhaps wisely stayed off the pitch, but he did find time to play a different form of the game, celebrating a few goals at table football. With no own goals, at least not in this game, at least. Right, let's bring in Alicia and Guto, shall we? what do we think about things like, you know, the table football? I mean, I can imagine Boris getting involved in a few of these things.
Yeah, he'd be insanely competitive, and God help the people on the other side. They might think it's just a game or just a footshed, and he would just, you know, go...
Or like clearing children out the way. Like,
I remember that rugby.
Yeah, and he did things like that often. I mean, you've got to try and, well, for some people it comes naturally. You do get on with normal people. You enjoy their company. That was passable, that was good. It gives you the chance for all kinds of clever metaphors. But in the end, you've got to get the sort of, got to know what you're standing for. You've got to know what people have got to conclude from all these images. And they've got to know whether you want to take them there, or there. And that's still a work in progress, I think.
Do you ever do stuff like this, kind of stunts? Have you kind of done a bit of football yourself, or...?
I'm not sure you'd ever see me playing football, mainly because my husband would be screaming at the screen going, what is she doing? Someone get her off the pitch. But look, you know, actually when I get out my constituents, I want to do the fun things. You know, I want to learn how to, like, bake something or make something, and if it's embarrassing, you know, so what? I went to a fitness club the other day for people who are recovering from serious chronic conditions or operations, and for an hour, as I went around and met every constituent doing it, I was doing physical exercise. I wasn't dressed for it. I looked a bit stupid, but it was so nice to have that informal conversation. And actually, the more we're normal people, the better. And yes, do you know what? It's nice to sometimes laugh at politicians in a nice way, and actually, you know, bring it on.
It's quite a serious point there, actually, about politicians' reputations and, like, yeah, like you say, like, not being seen as normal people.
Yeah. In the end, for me, authenticity, sincerity, that's the brand. So I once watched Tony Blair, long time ago, do headers with some top-rate footballer, and he held his own for a while. And you just thought, wow, because what would every young boy want to be able to do with that? And that's kind of cool, whether you're Prime Minister or not. Now, if you're trying to get into a racing car, which another senior politician, Ken Clarke, did, and then you can't climb out of it because you're not built for a racing car, that's not so cool. So, yes, have fun, but try and do things that are sort of authentic to you.
Quick thought from both of you. What does Rishi Sunak need to do this conference?
I mean, look, this is about uniting everyone, and I think actually he does need to set forward that vision. So look, we had a few months where it was all about stabilising, showing that you could be a grown-up, that you could govern, that you're going to make the right responsible decisions. Now it is about saying, this is my vision. You know, Labour have had 13 years in opposition. They still don't know what they stand for, and that is a major problem for them. So Rishi now needs to step forward and say, this is what I believe in, this is what I stand in, but also he does need to tell us more of who he is as a person.
So a bit of table football, not necessarily a bad thing then?
A bit of table football, but again, I don't think that's him. I mean, he is a clever guy, educated, you know, one of our best universities and abroad. He's married to a very rich woman from abroad. That's been a handicap, but it's also an asset. So why not project? This is what modern Britain is about. He represents that. He represents assimilation, climbing the ladder, going from sort of running a pharmacy to being Prime Minister. Let's show why his story is the story of aspiration for modern Britain.
And that multiculturalism isn't dead.
Well,
or a failure.
We'll see what the Home Secretary has to say about that. Thank you both for being on the programme today at the conference here on the Politics Hub. And remember, if you scan the QR code, you can catch up with all of the latest on the Hub throughout the day, our online Hub. And do remember, stay with Sky News for the UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Mead. That is up next. Over to SJ, and from here in Manchester, good night.